It's the time of year where we cozy up and get together to talk about the worst books of the year. And even though I like most books, there are a few duds this year. So let's get this party started and talk about the 5 worst books that I read in 2022 and why you should avoid some of these books like the plague. So for book number 5, we have Real Life, and this book actually isn't all that terrible. It just wasn't my thing. So the first couple of books we're going to talk about fit in that area, and I'm going to save the awfulest books for last. Real Life is a story about a Black gay man who is working in a predominantly white field, specifically in science, right? So he is currently working on some sort of project. He keeps going to the school, trying to get further and further into his research, and it's kind of a literary book talking about his experience and the struggles that he has as a Black man, the microaggressions and racism that he faces from his friends and the people around him. It also discusses topics like misogyny within the scientific fields and just all kinds of different things. I think I really like that idea, and in general I think that's great. I'm not a big fan of literary fiction, so there wasn't something specifically that kept me gripped, and I just didn't enjoy it. I don't think the book itself is bad, but I just hated the process of reading it, and I think that was 100% a me thing. I can't give you definitively any reason why it was bad or unenjoyable for me, so I do want to make it clear some people are probably going to really love this, and I do love a lot of the premises behind it. I did find the main character a little bit on the annoying side. I didn't like any of their friends or the fact that he didn't stand up for himself in certain situations. Some of it made perfect sense, some of it not so much. It just wasn't a book for me, but it is for somebody. Next up, we have Rosewater, and I technically didn't finish this book, so take this with a grain of salt. There wasn't anything wrong with this one either. I ended up getting like 85% through it, and I just realized I was bored. Science fiction isn't my main subject. I'm not the best with that genre, and so it was a struggle for me. I liked kind of the concept. There was like basically aliens, I guess, ended up invading a place at some point, and when they did and they fought off the aliens, some people, like a handful of people, ended up getting superpowers pretty much, and our main character is one of those people, and he realizes like that the other people are getting murdered off one by one or something like that. And I think there's also some sort of like dome or outer city or whatever. Like, this is the beginning of a trilogy. It's supposed to be setting everything up. I was just bored the whole time. I was bored. It may be a me thing. Maybe I missed some stuff. I don't know. It felt like we were in his head more than anything else. Like, he was slowly trying to make it somewhere, but not making any progress for a lot of it, even though things were happening. I don't know. It was just a weird experience for me. And then at some point I was like, I know I'm pretty close to finishing it, but I just am not enjoying myself. So I decided not to continue it. So again, I didn't finish it. Keep that in mind with my review. Words. Now we're getting into some books where I have reasons why you shouldn't read these. This one isn't the worst thing in the world. This is Devil House by Jean Darnell, and this book is basically about a man who is a writer, and he ends up buying and kind of moving to a house that has a sordid past so that he can research what happened to it for a book. It is very clinical. It is very boring. It is very true crimey, not horror, not scary. We don't get vibes or feelings. It's kind of, the whole thing felt like I was just being told stuff, not shown a single thing. I was very confused because I thought it was supposed to be horror and like scary and stuff, and it just felt boring. Like someone was just telling me these general events that were like vaguely interesting but also not all that interesting. I do feel bad by how much I disliked it, and part of me wonders like if I knew this was more true crime than it was horror and spooky and scary and whatever, would I have enjoyed it more? But then there's also part of me that's kind of all like, but the delivery, the way this was just like done was just so boring. Like, it was so clinical And it was just like, yes, and then so-and-so would walk to blah, 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 and there was a canvas on his wall, and it was just like, can you say anything more? And like, maybe it was the audiobook. Let me say this right now. It could have also been the audiobook. I did listen to this on audio, and maybe that's why it felt so monotonous and boring and dry. So I guess, you know, think about that. Think about that. Because like, I love audiobooks. I typically don't have issues with them. I did not like this book. I did finish it and I don't even know what happened. It was very forgettable. Then in the number 2 spot, a book that I basically unhauled immediately is Stolen Tongues. And I have severely mixed feelings about this book because for most of it, it was almost a 5-star book for me. I loved it. I loved the intro. I loved the setup. I loved the monotonous repetition. I thought it was spooky. It did things for me. I loved it. But when it came to the meat and potatoes, the whole thing behind what was going on, the author made some really ignorant and poor choices and how they handled certain things. And I couldn't get past it. I couldn't. I was just all like, you have got to be kidding me. Why on earth would you go in this direction? And then, not to do any spoilers, I don't do spoilers in my videos, so don't worry about this. But at the very end, the thing that I was most upset about, the author touched upon it in a author's note and kind of made it even worse for me. Like, I was trying to give them the benefit of the doubt, and then they basically tried to like gaslight me at the end and be like, I didn't do this thing that I actually did because of this reason, but he did it. He did the thing. He did the problematic thing. And like, there was easy ways, in my opinion, that it wouldn't have been as bad as it was. Like, if he did a couple of other things, if he did some things instead, like, there are reasons why I hated this so much. And if you are interested in knowing my thoughts, I do have a Goodreads review with a spoiler section that really talks about why I hated this book. And I will have that link down below if you want to know the spoilers, because I had thoughts. And like I said, I loved this book for a good chunk of it, but I was just so livid. And that is not to say I'm not like mad at the author or anything. Like, I don't necessarily think the author is a terrible person, and I am interested in trying to read something again from them in the future, although I am a little bit afraid that this whole thing is going over their head and they don't actually know what they did wrong based off of that author's note. So like, maybe I won't, I don't know, who knows. But I do want to kind of put that out there because like, I hate what happened at the end of this book. I'm not sure that that means anything bad about the author. Okay, on to the absolute worst book that I read this year, and that is The Supernatural Enhancements by Edgar Cantero. And this is another book that I technically did not finish. But before you go like, how are you recommending these things you haven't completely finished? I have reasons. I didn't even get very far into this book, and it was horrible. Why? Because we have a 28-year-old man who inherited a house from like a distant relative or whatever that has some problematic things with it, and he brings his like 15-year-old cousin or whatever. It turns out that there's more behind their relationship than that, but they go to this house to investigate, and the author keeps reminding us that this man is a man and that this 15-year-old girl is not just a 15-year-old girl, but she also looks young. She looks like a child. So you get those dynamics, and then you have this 28-year-old man who keeps saying inappropriate things, sexual things around in response to this 15-year-old girl. Like, they're sleeping on the same bed and he tells somebody, oh, the bed is so big and so vast that me and her could have our own separate orgies without affecting each other. And I was like, that's kind of a little weird, but whatever, you know? But it just kept happening. It just kept happening. And the fact that the author kept stressing the age difference and how young she looked just gave me the skeevies. I hated it so much. And then there was another situation where he was talking about her naked on a beach playing a guitar. Like, he's imagining her in this scenario. And I'm like, why? Why? why. And so I decided to do a little bit of snooping, and again, take this with a grain of salt, but I'm warning you, you probably should avoid this book because of the whole pedophilia thing. But I did some snooping, and spoilers, not spoilers, they hook up, right? So at some point, I guess she keeps trying to seduce him, and eventually he gives in. She's, as far as I'm aware, she's no older at this time. A bunch of other crazy stuff happens. Apparently there's some other issues. I didn't get that far. I didn't read it. I have no comments on any of that stuff. I can't because I didn't read it. But even before I got to them actually doing it, it was just very uncomfortable. Like the whole dynamic, and it was really the author's insistence on reminding, and I will read you a snippet, again, not a spoiler, and it says, "Behind the man, a skinny kid, capitalized K-I-D, in punk rags, 15-ish, is browsing through the shelves. Her dark hair falls in ringlets down her temples, ends a la Garcane at the back, and freezes in a volcanic eruption of dreadlocks and wool ribbons on top. The man turns to her, unwrapping a box." So that's one instance. There's even worse ones. And it's funny because like at this point I'm trying to like push past it. I'm all like, maybe I'm like thinking into this too much, but it just keeps happening. A young guy in sunglasses and a teen girl with dreadfalls comes in tow. Every instance where they were describing these two characters, they would point out that she was a young girl or a kid and that he was a man. And some instances it felt worse than others. On their own, it wasn't that big of a deal, but because all of these things just kept happening, him saying these inappropriate things, these reminders of their age difference and how young she looked, and all of that, I couldn't get past it. And I kept being all like, oh no, maybe I'm looking into it too much. Like maybe it's a cultural thing. But when I read and confirmed that, you know, several people complained about the fact that, you know, him and this child hook up, I was all like, okay, I was right. The skeevy feelings weren't me just like looking into it too much. Like it was actually weird. And so yeah, this is the worst book of the year. It was such a disappointment. I was so excited to read this. But yeah, unfortunately, sometimes things you're excited about are trash. So yeah, those are the worst books of 2022. I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know what your worst book of the year was. I would love to know what I should put on my to avoid list, and let me know why, just in case it happens to be a like, nah, I wasn't into literary fiction and this book was that, because I had one of these and you might love them. But yeah, thank you so much for sticking around. I hope you have a fantastic New Year's, and I will see you in the next one. Until then, bye!